AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Hi and welcome to AI in Action. I'm your host, Mike Froggatt. This week, we're joined by Brandon Allgood, Senior Vice President of AI and Data Science at Valo Health. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So first and foremost, would you like to give a brief career overview and introduction to our audience?
Yeah, so my background, at least for the field I'm in, is a little different. So I actually got a PhD in theoretical cosmology. Obviously, I wanted to be an academic. No one gets a degree in theoretical cosmology. There are not very many help wanted ads for theoretical cosmologists. But alas, I decided towards the end of grad school that academia really wasn't for me. Luckily, I was near Silicon Valley, and so it was pretty obvious where I was going to end up, over in Silicon Valley. And when I left grad school with my PhD, I started looking, or I guess it was when I was kind of towards the end of my PhD, I was looking for work, and there were the obvious places to go, Google, other places, and it really didn't, coding for clicks and coding for ads just didn't seem to really spark my interest. And I realized in exploring my interest, it had to be super hard problems, very large compute, and involve a lot of mathematics. And so in looking around, at least in academia, I was always told that you can't do academic level research outside of the university, because Bell Labs is gone, all of the big labs are gone. And it turns out that was bad advice. that there is actually academic level research happening, but it's happening in startups, not necessarily in big labs. And so I found a startup that was doing very interesting things at the intersection of large scale compute, machine learning, and chemical design. Joined that company and learned a lot about, well, number one, learned how to code. I thought in grad school I was a great coder until I actually started coding and met really good coders. And my office mate was a savant, and we used to do code reviews on a daily basis, and he used to kick my butt. And that was great. That was great training. Also, I learned how to run and how not to run a startup. So we went through various phases. We had the video games, the free food, the ping pong tables, the foosball. 5 o'clock was foos o'clock every day. And we did a lot of really cool. Yeah, we did a lot of really cool work, but didn't really quite. That company didn't quite get off the ground. And so in 2007, I started with a number of other people. I started my own company called Numerit, doing something very similar, but with a slightly different bend. And at that point, AWS had launched, and we were working on the cloud. That company, at the time, doing things in AI in 2007 was, especially in the pharmaceutical space, was pretty novel. And what we had noticed is there were these kind of two silos. There was a lot of really cool science going on in chemistry, and a lot of really cool things going on in AI, but the streams weren't crossing. And so one of the things, the key there was we were crossing the streams, and we had AWS finally in 2007, where we could, take a step back and ask, assume infinite compute. What would you do? Like, how would you change your models? How would you change the way you approach the problems, and really kind of rethinking those things? That company ultimately was very successful. When the AI hype wave hit, we were already, well ahead of the curve with a platform that was, we were building machine learning models that were really able to say to inform the entire spectrum of drug discovery programs. We'd worked with most of the big pharma, and ultimately that company was acquired by Valo, where I'm at today. that was acquired about a year and a half ago. And at Valo, I'm the SVP of Data Science and AI. And what we're doing here is building what we call the Opal platform, which is essentially a data science and machine learning centric platform to inform everything from all the way from basic biology, target identification, up through drug discovery and clinical trials. And really what we're doing is building the pharmaceutical company of the future, where everything is data centric, machine learning models drive decision making. So yeah, sorry, it was a bit of a long intro, but that's kind of the career at least from grad school till now.
No, I really appreciate it, and that segues very nicely into Valo and the challenges that the exciting projects that you're working on there. How was the transition to joining Valo from when the acquisition happened and you kind of coming into the new business?
Yeah, it was great actually. It was really well aligned. So what we had found at Numerate is there was, we were working primarily in drug discovery, and what we found is working with pharma, between a small company that had a solution, a technology solution, and big pharma, the gears never really meshed. And ultimately, what we decided at the end of Numerate is that in order for our technology and our way of thinking around data and making data-driven decisions, in order for it to have the real impact that we wanted it to have in pharma, we had to own it from the beginning to the end. And having pharma as a customer ultimately limited what we felt like we could do. It was like having a Ferrari engine and putting it in a Gremlin. It just wasn't going. And so our dream was, we were actually out raising money to start a full-fledged pharmaceutical company. We ran into David Barry from Flagship, who is now my CEO, and he convinced us that actually joining forces was the right way to do that, and that's ultimately kind of how that happened. And so it was a pretty smooth transition. Numerate became, in many ways, the technology core of what is Valo today. So it was almost an evolution more than a transition.
So for those who don't know, what challenges are Valo trying to solve?
What challenges aren't we trying to solve? So no, modern medicine is broken, and I'm just going to start with that. It's certainly not, while no pharmaceutical company will say they're not patient focused, the process is not patient focused. The process of approaching disease, solving these problems. And so we at Valo are trying to solve a large number of problems. One of those problems being, for example, when you go into a doctor, you have a particular disease, the doctor looks at you, they use their 5 senses, hopefully not taste anymore. They used to use taste to taste the blood of diabetics to see if it was sweet. And they diagnose you with a disease label, right? And that's what I would call a phenotype. You have these symptoms. Now the problem then is we then turn around and treat you biochemically, right? There's a real disconnect between treating biochemically and diagnosing with a disease label phenotypically, because there are multiple ways in which your underlying biology can dysfunction to result in that same phenotype, right? So for example, the one that we all know or should know is that cancer is not one disease, right? Cancer is thousands of diseases, but we still call it cancer. But what people cognitively have not been able to get across or get to is the fact that Alzheimer's, undoubtedly tens of diseases, Parkinson's disease, all disease labels that we have are incomplete. And so what we are trying to do is use primary EMR data, so patient level data, to actually develop sub-patient populations using modern machine learning techniques like autoencoders, and being able to connect those sub-patient populations with biomarkers, medically relevant and causal biomarkers using causal modeling, and connecting those biomarkers to a target. So in a way, we're using human data to uncover human targets in which we launch drug discovery programs for. Now that might sound like, well, of course you're going to use human data for human targets, but that's actually not the way it happens for most cases. In most cases, targets come out of animal models, of cancer cell lines in petri dishes, of very non-relevant human systems. And then what pharma does is spends tons of money, and you don't actually know that it's going to work in humans until phase 2 clinical trials. And you've already spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's even if you get there, right? But the way we're thinking about it is we start with human data. We then connect those humans to biomarkers and to targets, and then we launch a drug discovery program. We already know what our phase 2 patient population will be because we use them to determine what target to go after. So that's one of like hundreds of problems we're trying to solve. We're trying to make, and in this way, we're trying to make medicine more personal and really put the patient at the center. Now, what this ultimately means is that oftentimes we might have smaller patient populations for our drugs. And right now it takes about I think the current number is $2.5 billion to bring a drug to market, right? But that's an amortized cost over all failures, and 95% of drugs fail. So think about if it costs $2.5 billion to bring a drug to market, there's a reason, most drugs go after large, rich patient populations. You need to be able to recoup those, recoup those costs and actually make a profit. But if you go after smaller patient populations, then you have to also reduce the cost of bringing that drug to market. And so that's what we're also doing, is spending a lot of time using machine learning to drive the drug discovery program to improve PTRS, or probability of success, and reduce the number of compounds we make, and also speed up the timelines in drug discovery as well as in clinical. In clinical, it's a little harder because it's a highly regulated environment, but we are using novel machine learning to develop synthetic control arms for doing patient selection, for building adaptive clinical trials, where we can run these clinical trials much faster with smaller patient populations with a higher probability of reaching a statistically significant endpoint.
Yeah, and you make a good point about the small populations, because if you have to target such a small group, it has to become very expensive treatment as well. So that cost goes up exponentially. Now, as far as innovations within pharma, obviously you're the cutting edge of it. What are the future innovations that you're kind of most passionate about that you're working on?
Yeah, so eliminating animal models. So for those of you that aren't in the pharmaceutical space, when I say animal models, I mean animal testing, right? So in the pharmaceutical space, we see animals as models of humans, but they are terrible models of humans. So for example, mice and rats, they can eat garbage. So they have many more enzymes in their liver to digest just this nasty stuff that we couldn't. That's just an example of, a really clear example of how humans are not like mice or not like rats. And so at best, these animal models are, at, 50% accurate at best, right? We know we have drugs that end up in phase 1 that end up being toxic, that end up having issues. And we know that we can find drugs that are effective at reducing tumors in mice, but have no effect on human tumors. So animal models are imperfect, aside from the humanitarian side of not wanting to test on animals. But I believe we can build in silico models, so machine learning models of humans, that will far exceed the ability for animal models to predict how a compound is going to interact in a human. Why don't we build models of the humans? And so the only problem there is data and the scarcity of data. Not as many drugs make it into humans as make it into animals. So what we're working on right now are building models of these animal models. So at a minimum, we can stop testing as many drugs in animals, because we can predict how it's going to interact in those animals. But the thing is, we're still making models of humans. And so the real goal here, and I think the thing I'm excited about over the next 5 to 10 years, is really being able to eliminate animal models altogether. Now, that just goes to show you kind of the things that we're thinking about. And if you take it, then extend that even further, right? In where we're shooting to is that all testing, be it in vitro, in vivo, in the clinic, all testing hopefully we get to a time where all testing is confirmatory of our predictions. Right now we're testing to find out what the answer is, but we want to get to a phase where all testing, even clinical trials, are just kind of confirming what our prediction, maybe understanding the uncertainty in our prediction, right? And so if you think about where we want to go, testing's not going to go away. We want to make sure that things are right. There's always going to be some error in our prediction, but we want things to be confirmatory, not actually needing those data to tell us how the compounds are acting.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I think that takes it a step further. Something I'd never thought about. If does the FDA have a standardized in silico human model that they'll be using, and you'll have to use their version because that will be the standard. That'd be interesting to see.
That's exactly right, and I think that's where we're going. The FDA actually just 2 weeks ago, they're starting to think about machine learning. They are very passionate scientists. They are trying to do the best they can for society and also protecting them. And so they actually released an interesting paper around their initial thinking around AI and thinking of AI in the context of even in the context of therapeutics as a medical device, and starting to think about how we think about AI. And yeah, ultimately you'd want them to have these simulations, these models, and be able to use those across all submissions and to kind of standardize the stuff.
All right. So speaking of interesting papers, I know that we mentioned before we started the show that you have just written an op-ed on ethics and fairness within AI. What conclusions did you come to? What are your thoughts on the subject?
Yeah. So again, bias and unfairness are not things that AI created or machine learning creates. But it is the fact that machine learning and AI, as we start to offload a lot of decision making to these models, that it has the potential of making the disparities and the bias a lot worse, right? And for those of you that know about training machine learning models, right, you trained it on a set of data. And what data do you train models on? You train it on, obviously, data you collected, i.e. historical data. And our society has generally collected very biased sets of data, right? So if you look at, for example, the vast majority of pristine medical records, those generally are found in hospitals like Harvard, very kind of wealthy and often extremely Caucasian areas of the United States. And so the data sets that we have around patients and disease are very biased. But we're developing pharmaceuticals for society at large. And so if we're basing our models on these biased data sets, or we're designing clinical trials based on these biased sets, we're going to end up not truly treating patients. So I think there are 3 steps I lay out in the op-ed. Number 1, we need to again, this is more a problem with the system, but we need to start funding these underrepresented parts of our society, and making sure that the hospitals they're going to have the same level of electronic medical record systems as those in more affluent areas. It's really about equity in healthcare in general. It's also, this helps to build the trust with many of these groups as well. Secondly, we need more diversity just in people doing data science and AI, right? So you're not going to notice, it's going to be harder to notice biases if everybody in the room, everybody you're staring at is pretty much the same. You're not going to notice the biases in the data sets. You're not going to be thinking as well as that. So I think there's diversity of where the data comes from. There's diversity in the workforce that we need in data science and AI. And the third thing is that we need to work with the FDA to develop standards for AI standards, machine learning standards for testing, right? So one of the things that we want the FDA to work with us on are standards. How do we test for bias? How do we test the models for applicability and for fairness, right? So actually not just around building the models, but what are the testing harnesses? How do we make sure and ensure that the models that we are using are representing society and or representing more specifically the distribution of the population that have a particular disease?
So what's the solution? Do you think we'll engineer our way out of the bias, or is it a education piece? How do you think we'll actually solve it?
I think there are three things. I think there's certainly a lot of work to be done around bias in machine learning models. So there are other ways of dealing with. There are less I would say less accurate ways of dealing with bias. So you can reweight the training sets. You can say, say you have 70% red and 3% green, and really you're gonna test this model on a distribution of 50% red and 50% green. Well, you can reweight that training set to match the distribution of your test set. But the real problem that we have right now, you can't make up data, right? And so if you're missing pieces of the population, there's no reweighting that will help. So I think there is some advances and people have been developing methods around meta modeling. So where you can actually, why not train models to recognize bias and during the training of your models actually correct for those biases, and that'll get us somewhere. But if you don't have representations of parts of the society, you can't just make them up. And so that is a social problem. And I'm not gonna, I don't know that I want to put too much of a stake in the ground, but healthcare in this country and how we deal with healthcare, how we handle healthcare is beyond broken, right? Right now, my medical records for sure, and I have a chronic disease, are in at least 10 different systems. And I'm the person that's communicating between the 3 different doctors that happen to be in 3 different places that are required to treat my chronic condition, right? And I shouldn't be the one coordinating. I shouldn't be the one saying, hey, my tests are here or my tests are over there, right? So I think we as a society need to, especially in the United States, need to fix that. And then I think it's also education and educating people about not only that these biases really hurt us and hurt society and hurt our ability to generate compounds, but just kind of overall education around machine learning and not that everybody has to be able to train a machine learning model, but that at least everybody should understand some of the fundamentals. And people have talked about replacing statistics in school and college with basic machine learning class. And I think actually that's probably not a bad idea. So for those, getting rid of the statistics requirement and or bringing in a good chunk of machine learning into these statistics courses, and so that people have just kind of a certain level of understanding of these things.
Oh, very interesting. I think you make a good point. If you're the one communicating it, you're the least qualified of the 4 people involved to be communicating that. So yeah, I think that does need to be fixed. Now, as far as the op-ed goes, we'll obviously share a link if you want to check it out. Equally, I wanted to just ask you about building data science team in general. So what do you think are the most important elements of a successful data science AI team?
Yeah, I think as I said before, it's certainly diversity and diversity background, especially when you're dealing with human health and human data, right? I think that's a key element. I think beyond that is making sure you have a set of different skill sets. There are going to be, there are people out there. So data science is such a it's a somewhat vague term, and so there's, and people that call themselves data scientists run the gamut from someone with a PhD in a very small area that understands a little bit and knows how to script some things in R or Python, and then you have people that are coming from the computer science side that are more, understand the basics. Then you have people coming from mathematics. So there's kind of there's this triangle, at least in our space, there's this triangle of kind of where I try and place people in the triangle. They're in this triangle plot where, are they more math? They more the subject matter expert, or more the software developer, right? And what you want to be able to do is get the right mixture of those three characteristics. And no one's going to be amazing at all three. Maybe if there are a few people in the world that are probably amazing at all three. There are very few people that are going to be that. So you want to build teams that can blanket that space and have some overlap. Those are kind of the three things that really require a good healthy data science team.
Fantastic. Brandon, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated having you on the show, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, great. Again, like I said, thanks for having me.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.